3 months. That's how long I spent working on that presentation. 3 months of late nights, countless revisions, and more coffee than any person should drink. I remember sitting at my desk way past midnight, going through data, creating charts, and making sure every single detail was perfect. This wasn't just another project for me. This was my chance to show everyone what I was capable of. The morning of the presentation, I woke up earlier than usual. My stomach was doing flips and my hands felt cold despite the warm weather. I practiced my opening lines in the mirror, adjusted my tie 3 times, and headed to the office an hour early. I wanted everything to be ready. The conference room was the big one, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. They only used this room for important meetings. As people started filing in, I felt my heart beating faster. There were senior executives I had only seen in company-wide emails. There were investors wearing expensive suits. There were colleagues from different departments, all curious about this new strategy everyone had been talking about. I set up my laptop, tested the projector twice, and made sure my notes were in order. My manager walked in and gave me an encouraging smile. She sat in the back row and I felt a bit relieved. At least she was there for support if anything went wrong. The room filled up quickly and suddenly it was time to start. I took a deep breath, clicked to the first slide, and began speaking. The first few minutes went smoothly. I explained the current challenges our company was facing, the gaps in our digital infrastructure, and why change was necessary. People were nodding along and I started to relax a little. Maybe I could actually pull this off. I moved to the next section, talking about the research I had done, the companies I had studied, and the solutions I had discovered. That's when it happened. I was right in the middle of explaining the implementation timeline when I felt it. A hand on my shoulder, light but firm enough that I couldn't ignore it. I paused mid-sentence and turned slightly. It was my manager. She had gotten up from her seat in the back and walked all the way to the front without me noticing. She smiled at me, then at the audience, and said something like, "Let me add some context here." Before I could process what was happening, she started talking. She began explaining my slides, my research, my ideas, but the way she said it made it sound like she was the one who had come up with everything. She used words like "we" and "our approach," but her body language told a different story. She had positioned herself right in front of the screen, and I found myself taking a small step to the side. I stood there, not knowing what to do. Should I interrupt her? Should I try to take back control of my own presentation? But she was my manager. She was more senior than me, and everyone in the room was now looking at her, not me. The executives started asking questions, but they directed them at her. She answered confidently, using all the information I had prepared, all the data I had collected. One of the investors made a comment about how impressive the strategy was. He looked directly at my manager and said, "This shows real vision and leadership." She thanked him, then added, "Of course I had some help putting this together." Some help. 3 months of my life reduced to some help. The presentation that was supposed to be my moment turned into her show. I tried to jump back in a few times, adding details here and there, but it felt like I was assisting her rather than presenting my own work. The energy in the room had shifted completely. When people took notes, I noticed they were writing her name, not mine. After about 40 minutes, the presentation ended. Everyone clapped and several people came up to shake hands, but they walked past me and went straight to her. They congratulated her on the excellent work. They asked her questions about implementation. They wanted to schedule follow-up meetings with her. I stood there like a piece of furniture, smiling awkwardly and nodding when someone occasionally glanced my way. One executive did stop to talk to me. He patted me on the back and said, "Good job supporting your manager on this. It's great to see teamwork." Supporting her? I had created every single slide in that presentation. Every graph, every strategy point, every recommendation came from my research. But in that moment, I couldn't find the words to correct him. I just smiled and said, "Thank you." After everyone left, my manager came up to me. She seemed genuinely pleased with how everything went. "That went really well," she said cheerfully. "You did great up there." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her why she had taken over my presentation. But instead, I just nodded and mumbled something about being glad it was over. Walking back to my desk felt surreal. I kept replaying the moment in my head. That hand on my shoulder, that simple gesture that changed everything. It wasn't aggressive or obvious. To everyone else in the room, it probably looked like a supportive manager helping her team member. But I knew what it really was. It was her way of claiming ownership, of making my moment hers. I sat down at my desk and stared at my computer screen. My colleagues came by to congratulate me, but their words felt empty. "Great team effort," one of them said. Team effort. I had worked alone for 3 months. I had spent weekends in the office. I had sacrificed time with friends and family. And now it was being called a team effort. That afternoon, I received an email from one of the senior executives. It was addressed to my manager with me copied. The email praised her innovative thinking and strategic vision. It mentioned how her proposal would be moving forward and how the leadership team was excited to see her implementation plan in action. I was mentioned once at the very end as someone who had provided valuable support. I closed my laptop and sat back in my chair. Something had fundamentally changed in that conference room. I had entered thinking it was my big break, my chance to prove myself. I left feeling invisible. That hand on my shoulder had done more than just interrupt my presentation. It had erased me from my own achievement. The worst part was the confusion I felt. Was I overreacting? Maybe this was just how things worked in the corporate world. Maybe I should be grateful that my manager was involved. Maybe I was being too sensitive about the credit issue. These thoughts swirled in my head as I packed up my things and headed home that evening. But deep down I knew the truth. What happened in that conference room wasn't right. It wasn't support. It wasn't mentorship. It was something else entirely. And as I rode the elevator down to the parking lot, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this moment define me. Somehow, I would find a way to reclaim what was mine. The days after the presentation felt strange. Everyone in the office seemed to be talking about the new digital strategy, but they were talking about it as if my manager had created it. I heard conversations in the break room about how impressive she was, how forward-thinking, how she was really going places in the company. My name barely came up, and when it did, it was always in the context of being part of her team. About a week later, I was copying some documents when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a strategy document sitting in the printer, and I recognized it immediately because I had written it, but when I picked it up, I saw that the header had been changed. Where my name used to be listed as the primary author, it now said something different. My manager's name was at the top in bold letters. My name appeared further down, listed under contributors along with 2 other people who had barely been involved in the project. I stood there holding that paper, feeling a wave of anger wash over me. This wasn't just about credit anymore. Someone had literally gone into my document and rearranged the names. This was deliberate. This was planned. I made a copy for myself and put the original back in the printer tray, my hands shaking slightly. Over the next few weeks, I started paying closer attention to everything. I noticed that in meetings, whenever someone asked about the digital transformation project, my manager would answer as if she had personally developed every aspect of it. She talked about when I was researching this and when I came up with this approach using the exact words and ideas from my original proposal. It was like watching someone wear your clothes and pretend they had always owned them. The breaking point came during a leadership meeting that I wasn't even supposed to attend. I was walking past the conference room when I heard my manager's voice through the slightly open door. Curiosity got the better of me and I stopped to listen. She was presenting the project timeline to the senior leadership team, and she kept saying things like my vision and my strategy and what I've developed. There was no mention of me at all. It was as if I had never existed. I needed to talk to someone about this, someone who would understand, so I reached out to a colleague from a different department, someone I had worked with on a previous project. We met for coffee at a small cafe a few blocks from the office. I wasn't sure how to start the conversation, so I just laid it all out honestly. I told her about the presentation, about the document, about everything. She listened quietly, stirring her coffee slowly. When I finished, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. It was somewhere between sympathy and recognition. Then she said something I didn't expect. She did the same thing to me 2 years ago. My colleague told me her story. She had developed a whole new system for client retention, something that had never been done at our company before. She had spent months on it, testing different approaches, gathering data, building relationships with clients to understand what they needed. When it came time to present her findings, guess what happened? The exact same thing. That hand on the shoulder. The supportive manager who gradually took over. the credit that disappeared like smoke. She told me that she had tried to speak up about it, but she was made to feel like she was being difficult, like she didn't understand how teams worked, like she was being ungrateful for the opportunities she had been given. Eventually, she got so tired of fighting that she just left the company. She found a better job elsewhere, but the whole experience had left a bitter taste that still lingered. Hearing her story made me feel two things at once. First, relief that I wasn't crazy or oversensitive. This was a real pattern, something that had happened before. But second, I felt worried. If she couldn't fix the situation, what chance did I have? That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything that had happened and everything I had learned. I realized that I had a choice to make. I could stay quiet, let this slide, and hope that eventually people would recognize my work, or I could do something about it. The first option felt safer, but it also felt like giving up. The second option felt scary, but at least it meant fighting for what was right. I got out of bed and opened my laptop. I started going through all my old files, looking for evidence. I found the original versions of documents with timestamps showing when I had created them. I found emails I had sent to my manager with my ideas and proposals. I found drafts with my comments and edits. I saved everything to a separate folder and backed it up in 3 different places. Then I started keeping a journal. Not anything fancy, just a simple document where I wrote down what happened each day. If my manager took credit for something in a meeting, I wrote it down with the date and who was present. If someone complimented her work on something I had actually done, I recorded it. I felt a bit paranoid doing this, like I was some kind of spy, but I knew I needed to protect myself. The more I documented, the clearer the pattern became. It wasn't just the big presentation. It was dozens of small moments over the past year. Ideas I had shared in one-on-one meetings that later became her suggestions in team meetings. Solutions I had figured out that she presented as her own breakthroughs. It had been happening all along, but I had been too trusting to see it. One afternoon, I was working late when I overheard another conversation. My manager was on a phone call in her office, and her door wasn't completely closed. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but I heard her say something that made me freeze. She was talking to someone about the digital transformation project, probably someone from another company. She said, "Yes, I developed the entire strategy myself. It's been my main focus for the past 6 months. 6 months? I had only presented it to her 3 months ago, and she had barely been involved until the day of the presentation." I went back to my desk and added this to my journal. Then I sat there staring at my computer screen and made a decision. I was done being silent. I was done being invisible. I was going to confront this situation head-on, regardless of the consequences. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew I had to do something. That hand on my shoulder had tried to push me aside, but I wasn't going to let it keep me down anymore. Asking for a meeting with your manager is usually no big deal. But this time my hands were sweating as I typed out the email. I kept it simple and professional, just requesting 30 minutes of her time to discuss some concerns. She responded within an hour, suggesting we meet the next afternoon in her office. I spent that entire night preparing, going over my notes, organizing my evidence, and practicing what I wanted to say. The next day dragged on forever. I couldn't focus on any of my regular work. I kept checking the clock, watching the minutes crawl by. Finally, it was time. I grabbed the folder I had prepared, took a deep breath, and walked to her office. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. She greeted me with her usual warm smile and friendly tone. "Come in, sit down. What's on your mind?" She seemed completely relaxed, like this was just another ordinary meeting. That almost made it harder. I sat down across from her desk, put my folder on my lap, and started talking. I tried to be calm and professional. I explained that I had some concerns about the recent presentation and how the credit for the work was being distributed. I mentioned the document with the changed author names. I brought up the meetings where my contributions weren't being acknowledged. I tried to use neutral language, avoiding any accusatory tone. Her expression changed as I talked. The warm smile faded, replaced by a look of surprise that seemed almost hurt. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and sighed. "I'm really surprised to hear this," she said slowly. "I thought I was supporting you. I thought I was helping give you visibility." She went on to explain her perspective. She said that during the presentation, she had stepped in because she could see I was nervous and she wanted to help me succeed. She claimed that she had only been trying to show the executives that our team was collaborative and that I had strong leadership backing me. As for the document, she said it was standard practice to list the manager as the primary contact for any major project. You have to understand how things work at this level, she continued, her tone shifting to something that felt almost like she was teaching me a lesson. In leadership, we don't focus on individual credit. It's always a team effort. The important thing is that the project is moving forward, right? That's what matters. I felt the conversation slipping away from me, my legitimate concerns being twisted into something else entirely. But I had prepared for this. I opened my folder and pulled out printed copies of my original documents with timestamps. I showed her emails where I had presented ideas that later became her suggestions. I had dates, times, and specific examples. I'm not talking about normal team collaboration, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm talking about specific instances where my work was presented as yours. I spent 3 months on that strategy. I created every part of it, and now it's being attributed almost entirely to you. Her demeanor changed completely. The friendly tone disappeared and something colder took its place. She looked at the papers I had laid out, then back at me. I see, she said quietly. So you've been keeping track of all this? The way she said it made it sound like I had done something wrong, like documenting my own work was somehow a betrayal. She shuffled the papers back toward me and leaned forward. Let me be honest with you. If you can't function as a team player, if you're going to be this concerned about who gets credit for what, then maybe you're not ready for the kind of leadership role you think you deserve. I felt like I had been slapped. Here I was, presenting clear evidence of my work being taken, and somehow I was being made to feel like the problem. She continued, I've given you opportunities that other people in your position don't get. I've mentored you, I've included you in high-level projects, I've opened doors for you, and this is the gratitude I get? We went back and forth for a few more minutes, but it was clear we weren't getting anywhere. She maintained that everything she had done was proper and supportive. I maintained that my contributions deserved recognition. The meeting ended with tension hanging thick in the air. As I left her office, she said, I hope you'll think carefully about what being part of a team really means. Walking back to my desk, I felt shaky and upset. Part of me wondered if I had made a huge mistake. Maybe I should have just kept quiet. Maybe I had just destroyed my career over something I should have let go. But another part of me felt strangely relieved. At least I had said something. At least I had stood up for myself. The next few days were weird. My manager was polite but distant. She stopped inviting me to certain meetings. When I sent her emails, her responses were brief and formal. I could feel a shift in the office, too. It was subtle, but people seemed to be treating me differently. I wondered what she had said to them. Then things got worse. About a week after our meeting, I received a feedback email from her. It was the first time she had ever put criticism of my work in writing. She pointed out small mistakes in recent projects, things that had never been mentioned before. She questioned my attention to detail, my time management, and my communication skills. None of it was major, but together it painted a picture of someone who wasn't performing well. I realized what was happening. This was retaliation.
I had challenged her, and now she was building a case against me.
I saved the email and added it to my growing folder of documentation. I also started being extra careful with all my work, double-checking everything, keeping detailed records of all my tasks and accomplishments. Around this time, I ran into the colleague who had told me about her similar experience. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. She's making your life difficult now, isn't she? She asked. I nodded. That's what she did to me, too. She'll try to push you out or make you quit. But my colleague also gave me some advice. You need to go over her head, she said. Talk to HR, talk to her boss. You have documentation, right? Use it. I'd been afraid to escalate things, worried about being seen as a troublemaker, but I was starting to realize that staying quiet was only making things worse. That night, I updated all my documentation. I organized everything chronologically, created a clear summary of what had happened, and prepared myself for the next step. I didn't know if it would help or hurt my situation, but I knew I couldn't just let this continue. That hand on my shoulder had tried to push me into silence, but I was finding my voice even if it was shaky and scared. Making the decision to go to human resources was one of the hardest things I've ever done. I knew that once I took that step, there was no going back. Things would either get better or much worse. I spent a whole weekend thinking about it, weighing the risks, considering what might happen. But every time I thought about just letting it go, I remembered that presentation, that moment when my work was taken from me. and I knew I had to try. Monday morning, I sent an email to HR requesting a confidential meeting. They responded quickly and scheduled something for Wednesday afternoon. Those 2 days felt like the longest of my life. I kept wondering if I was doing the right thing. I kept second-guessing myself. But I also kept remembering my colleague's story and realizing that if I didn't speak up now, this pattern would just continue. The HR meeting was professional but felt somewhat cold. I sat across from an HR representative who took notes while I explained everything. I showed my documentation, walked through the timeline, and described how things had changed since I confronted my manager. The HR person listened, asked a few clarifying questions, and promised they would look into it. But I left feeling uncertain. Would anything actually happen, or was this just a formality? Meanwhile, things at work continued to get worse. My manager started excluding me from important meetings altogether. Projects that I should have been involved in were being assigned to other team members. When I asked about it, she said she was redistributing responsibilities to balance the workload better. But I knew what was really happening. I was being sidelined. The isolation was the hardest part. Other colleagues started treating me differently too. I don't know what my manager had told them, but suddenly people weren't as friendly. Conversations would stop when I entered the break room. People who used to chat with me casually now kept interactions brief and professional. I felt like I was being frozen out, and it hurt more than I expected. But I had made my choice, and I wasn't going to back down now. I decided I needed to take one more step. I requested a meeting with my manager's supervisor, someone I had only met a few times before. His name was on all the organizational charts as the head of our entire division. Getting on his calendar took some persistence, but eventually, his assistant scheduled 15 minutes for me on a Thursday afternoon. I was incredibly nervous walking into that meeting. This was someone way above my level, someone who could make or break careers with a single decision. But I had my folder of documentation, and I had the truth on my side. I sat down in his office and got straight to the point. I knew I only had 15 minutes, so I couldn't waste time. I explained the situation as clearly and factually as possible. I showed him the original documents with my name and timestamps. I showed him the versions where the names had been changed. I walked him through the presentation incident and the pattern of credit being reassigned. Then I told him about what had happened after I raised concerns with my manager, how I was now being excluded and receiving negative feedback for the first time ever. He listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions. Unlike the HR meeting, this felt different. He seemed genuinely concerned. He made notes and asked for copies of my documentation. When our 15 minutes were up, he did something unexpected. He asked his assistant to clear his next meeting so we could continue talking. We spent another 30 minutes going through everything in detail. He asked about specific projects, specific meetings, specific incidents. He wanted dates and names. He asked how long this had been going on, and whether I knew of anyone else who had experienced similar things. I mentioned my colleague, though I didn't give her name without permission. At the end of our conversation, he thanked me for bringing this to his attention. He said he would need to investigate further, but that my concerns were being taken seriously. He also said something that surprised me. "You're not the first person to raise issues about this, but you're the first with this level of documentation. That helps." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, maybe even months. Hope. Not certainty, because I knew things could still go badly, but hope that maybe, just maybe, something would actually change. Over the next 2 weeks, things got quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear anything from HR or from the division head. My manager continued to be cold and distant. I started to worry that nothing was going to happen, that I had gone through all of this for nothing. I even started updating my resume, thinking I might need to look for a new job. Then one morning, my manager wasn't in the office. Her door was closed, and when I asked someone where she was, they said she was in meetings all day. The next day, the same thing happened. On the third day, there was an announcement. A company-wide email saying that my manager would be transitioning to a new role within the company, and that there would be some restructuring in our department. I didn't know the details at first, but word travels fast in an office. People started talking. Someone heard that there had been an investigation. Someone else heard that other team members had come forward with complaints after learning about my situation. The full story came out gradually over the following weeks. It turned out I wasn't alone. After I spoke up, Two other people from our team had also gone to HR with their own experiences. The division head had conducted interviews with multiple team members, and a pattern had emerged. My manager had been doing this for years, taking credit for other people's work, building her reputation on the backs of her team members. The company offered her a choice: accept a significant demotion to a position where she wouldn't manage anyone, or leave with a severance package. She chose to leave. Within a month, she was gone from the company entirely. You might think I would have felt victorious when I heard this, but I didn't. Mostly, I just felt exhausted. The whole process had drained me emotionally and mentally. I had spent months dealing with this situation, documenting everything, fighting for recognition, dealing with retaliation. Yes, there was some satisfaction in knowing that justice had been served, in knowing that she couldn't do this to anyone else at our company, but the personal cost had been high. My reputation at work had taken a hit during all of this. Some people saw me as brave for speaking up, but others saw me as a troublemaker, someone who had caused problems and gotten their manager fired. The office dynamics had changed, and I wasn't sure where I fit in anymore. I had won the battle, but I wasn't sure yet what the victory actually meant. 6 months after everything went down, I was sitting in a completely different office, in a different part of the city, working for a different company. The change hadn't been planned, at least not initially. But as things at my old company remained complicated even after my manager left, I started to realize that maybe it was time for a fresh start. The opportunity came through a recruiter who had found my profile online. A growing tech company was looking for someone with expertise in digital transformation, specifically someone who had developed innovative strategies in this area. When I talked to them, they weren't interested in hearing about my manager or the politics of my previous workplace. They wanted to hear about my actual work, my ideas, my vision. The interview process was refreshing. I presented the same strategy that had caused so much trouble at my old job, but this time it was different. This time my name was on every slide. This time when people asked questions, they asked me directly. This time when someone complimented the work, they were looking at me when they said it. I got the job offer 2 weeks later. It came with a better title, better pay, and most importantly, a culture that seemed to genuinely value individual contributions. When I gave my notice at the old company, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. Some of my former colleagues were happy for me. Others seemed relieved that the person who had caused all that drama was leaving. I didn't mind either reaction. I was just ready to move on. Now, sitting in my new office on my 6-month anniversary with the company, I found myself thinking back to that day. That presentation, that moment when I felt a hand on my shoulder and everything changed. It seemed like it had happened to a different person, in a different lifetime, but I knew it had shaped who I had become. The experience taught me things I wish I hadn't needed to learn. I learned that not everyone who smiles at you has your best interests at heart. I learned that there are people in the professional world who build their success by taking from others. I learned that kindness and support can sometimes be masks for manipulation. These were hard lessons, and they made me more cautious, maybe even a bit cynical. But I also learned positive things. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it's scary and uncomfortable, is worth it. I learned the importance of keeping records and documenting your work. Not because you're paranoid, but because you're protecting yourself. I learned that silence in the face of wrong doesn't make you a good team player. It just enables bad behavior. Most importantly, I learned what kind of leader I wanted to be. In my new role, I managed a small team of 3 people. It wasn't a big team, but it was mine, and I was determined to do things differently. When someone on my team did good work, I made sure everyone knew it. When we presented projects together, I made sure their names were